We are now going to pay tribute to two very special people, well known to all of us, who have labored hard and long in the vineyards of democracy for the ideals and the principles that the labor movement was founded upon. This is an act of love and affection. And to do justice to this act of love and affection, we persuaded another good friend to make the presentation for us, Bruno Gerussi.
Thank you. Where's the relic, huh? Mr. President, members of the Executive Council, distinguished guests, delegates, Mrs. Lewis, Mrs. Douglas, ladies and gentlemen. It is one of the more satisfying and uplifting fringe benefits of working in the entertainment industry that I am invited to an occasion such as this and given the singular privilege of voicing on behalf of the working men and women of the Canadian Labour Congress and in truth of this country, a deep and sincere expression of gratitude, admiration, respect, and true affection for our two most distinguished guests of honor, David Lewis and Tommy Douglas. As Canadians, it has been, I believe, our great good fortune to have watched them in action over the years as they carried the banner and the idea of democratic social justice into the public and political arenas of this country. It is our further good fortune that they are both such scrappy individuals because it's been an uphill battle all the way. But we, ladies and gentlemen, have had a ringside seat at one of the most fundamental and optimistic social struggles in history. To conceive of a humanistic, socially responsible, democratic nation is one thing. Bring it about through peaceful, democratic processes, forever conscious of the rights of individual free citizens, is a monumentally optimistic undertaking. And though I doubt that many of you, least of all our guests of honor, would consider that we've reached utopia and that our struggle is past, we must admit on this auspicious occasion that the dream is still very much alive, and as day by day it becomes a reality, it is increasingly apparent that much of what is now accepted as just and responsible in Canadian society is the direct result of a battle won by either or both of these two great Canadians. Now, I am aware that the term greatness has lost much of its currency these days. And what hasn't? It is also our national character to avoid overblown phrases, especially when describing one of our own. But I don't think it'll do us any harm to admit that certain individuals in the brief historical space of a human lifetime can change the course and destiny of a nation. It has happened in our lifetimes. Because of their ability to speak with a clear and ringing voice the needs and the dreams of the common man, because of their clear-eyed, unswerving vision of the future, because they understood the nature of the struggle and were willing to see it through, inch by hard-fought inch, through times of trials and triumphs, because they were tireless, selfless, and tough, because they are the men they are, this is a better, fairer, more progressive and responsible land in which to live. Now, there are pessimists abroad in the land. They tell us we're going to hell in a handbasket. They say we're losing the country, that it's not out there anymore. They would have us believe that there is no point getting involved because nothing can be done. If there was time to list the concrete and abiding changes for good brought about by the two men who grace our presence today, it would ring out as a litany of hope, of proof positive that man has the capacity to change his world for the good of all without trampling the rights of his fellow men. That one man of conviction and dedication can become 10, and 10 become 1,000, and 1,000 men and women united is a force to reckon with. And the person who can lead this force and articulate its cause is a person of destiny. We Canadians, men and women of the Canadian Labour Congress and the New Democratic Party, have been doubly blessed in our leaders. For over half a century, we had the very best representation our country can produce. I ran into Tommy Douglas once. We often meet in airplanes going one way or another. And Tommy, we exchanged greetings and asked about our respective families, and then Tommy said, you know, he said, I was just being interviewed on the telephone by someone who asked me that if a movie was to be made of my life, who would I want to play me, Tommy Douglas? And I told him, you, Bruno Gerussi. And I said, Tommy, I'm very flattered, but that's ridiculous. I'm much too tall for the part. But what a part that would be. Pugilist, yeah, I used to be a fighter. A preacher, a voice in the wilderness, the voice of the people. An abiding love story with a lovely lady called Irma to give the script a core of warmth and tenderness. Great political battles to be fought and won and lost and fought again. And good dialogue for Tommy Douglas is as quotable as Stephen Leacock and often funnier. The only problem is you'd have to follow Tommy around with a tape recorder 24 hours a day to catch all the deliciously clever and occasionally devastating one-liners which seem to flow from a never-ending fountainhead of wit and wisdom and humor. And when Tommy was a youth, and I believe it was here in Winnipeg, he injured his knee. And the injury evolved into osteomyelitis, and the disease threatened his leg. It looked quite likely the doctors would have to amputate his leg because his family could not afford any of the expensive treatment needed to nurse the diseased leg back to health. Unfortunately, a respected surgeon, Dr. R.H. Smith, heard of Tommy's problem and offered to try out a new experimental surgery on the leg if the parents agreed to let him use Tommy as a test case. And they agreed, and Tommy's leg was saved, and a seed was sown in the young boy. He had been fortunate. But what about all the other kids his age? The inequity of the social order of the day began to dawn on him. If your parents were poor, you had your leg sawn off. If your parents were wealthy, your leg was saved. And if you were extremely lucky, you became a successful guinea pig for a doctor's experiment. The thought of this period in his life and his extreme good fortune would haunt Tommy later on. Everyone should be entitled to the same chance at health, a job, a home, and a happy family. These should be a standard in a wealthy nation as Canada, not the exception to the rule. And as we all know, Tommy Douglas, everyone is aware, is the father of Medicare in this country. He's the man who turned the province of Saskatchewan from a near bankrupt have-not province to one of the most enlightened, progressive, and successful provinces in this country. He's the man who battled the vested interests in the name of the common man from one end of this country to the other, from the provincial arena to the federal parliament, whose voice was constant and unswerving in times of defeat as well as victory. A liberal opponent in a political debate once grew so exasperated with Tommy that he blurted out, "Why, you little runt, I could bite your head off." And Tommy coolly replied, "If you did, you'd have more brains in your belly than you have between your ears." About a half a dozen years ago, a writer was following Tommy Douglas around Ottawa, gathering material for a book. Now, that's a task that's baffled 3 generations of writers. They invariably claim that Tommy is a mystery man who no one knows, though he's lived about 2/3 of his life before microphones, cameras, and the people and the commons. Anyway, Tommy and his biographer are walking along a hallway in Ottawa, where he stops and he turns around and he says to her, "I'm afraid I won't be much help to you." He said, "You'll find me a very boring person. I don't do anything but work." And that must be true. I can never been able to get him on Celebrity Cooks. I always suspect it's because he never found time to eat. Well, Tommy, you eat and I'll do the cooking, okay? He's been center stage in politics for what's sneaking up on 50 years. And most of you probably read that annual story in the newspapers about how he's retired again. I swear I've been reading that Tommy Douglas retires story since 1976, and it ain't happened yet. I keep finding Douglas-isms in the newspapers, like it was Douglas who put the present energy situation in perspective for many of us, when he said the government's going to wait for the taps to run dry before they turn them off, and that's about it. And it was Tommy who said of the Liberals' fall from grace just recently that it demonstrated a kick at one end of the spine can have a very stimulating effect on the other end. And explaining those strange occasions when NDP policy surfaces in liberal campaign platforms, it was Douglas who said, "Nothing concentrates a man's mind more than the certain knowledge he'll be hanged in the morning." He still is what he has always been, a battler on behalf of people, not in the academic way of little L liberals, but as a guy who is motivated by real compassion for real human beings. Tommy Douglas had the first socialist government on the continent. And as Keith Spicer said after Douglas got into federal politics, the NDP is probably the party God backs in most Canadian elections. And somebody once said that Tommy Douglas didn't have to kiss babies to win elections. Babies kiss him. In fact, the only bit of criticism I could find anywhere about Tommy is one article by a nationally known political historian who said Tommy Douglas's one mistake was he was right too soon. For most of us, and the 2 generations of politicians in his party, in his debt, he is, as the columnist said, a good deed in a naughty world, a little bit of sanity in a massive asylum, a stiff, bright breath of clean prairie air. Tommy Douglas.
This award, which we are presenting to Tommy today, is a piece of sculpture designed by a well-known artist in Ottawa by the name of Bruce Garner. The inscription reads as follows: T.C. Douglas, what we desire for ourselves, we wish for all. To this end, may we take our share of the world's work and the world's great struggles. J.S. Wordsworth. presented to Tommy Douglas by the Canadian Labour Congress as a tribute to his unswerving, lifelong dedication to those ideals which have inspired the labor movement, its friends and allies throughout the years: justice, freedom, equality, and respect for human dignity. Tommy Douglas.
My good friend Dennis, and my favorite actor Bruno, my colleague David Lewis, all the platform guests, and friends of the trade union movement. I have listened with bated breath to that marvelous eulogy which has just been delivered by the hero of the beachcombers. It made me think of an introduction I got at a university graduation in Saskatchewan some years ago by a student who had just finished being a leader at a boys' camp. And he was introducing me. And he said, I'm very nervous about introducing the premier. But he said, last summer I worked in a boys' camp. And we had one boy who, when the meal was served, wouldn't eat prunes. And those in charge of the camp said, you eat the prunes, or God will punish you. He ate all the prunes except one, and he quit. They said, eat the prunes. He said, no. He said, all right, you'll be sorry. Just put it up here on a shelf. That night they had a storm. When the storm was all over, the thunder and the lightning and the rain, they couldn't find little Peter. Went down to the dining room, and here was Peter sitting up at the table eating this last prune. And this chap who was director went over and said, oh, you're here? Yeah, he said. Wasn't that a hell of a fuss about one little prune? Oh, Bruno, I thought that was an awful fuss about one little prune. As a matter of fact, first of all, I'm extremely grateful to Dennis and to all the executive of the CLC and to all the members of the CLC and their affiliated unions for this generous gesture. Both Irma and I appreciate it more than we can say. But I never allow myself to lose my perspective. Because I learned a long time ago that it isn't the fellow who waves the baton that makes the music. Did you ever notice that? Fellow stands up there and he waves a little stick around. The son of a gun never even lets a peep out of him. He probably couldn't whistle God Save the Queen if you paid him for it, you know. But he stands there beating, and when it's all over and you've had a lovely entertainment, who takes the bows? This little guy with the baton, you know. He probably couldn't play the tuba, he can't play the fiddle, he can't blow the flute, he doesn't know what to do with a clarinet. But here he is. One should never forget, you know, that you may have the privilege of waving the baton. You may have the privilege of leading some particular project, but you don't make the music. The music is made by all the people who work together, who work in harmony, who work on the same theme, on the same tempo, on the same tune. They're the people that make music. Now you have to have somebody beating time. But the fellow that beats time shouldn't kid himself that he's making music. The son of a gun never lets a peep out of him. At the end, of course, he takes all the bows. He gets a lot of the credit. But I've never kidded myself. Leaders have a place. People who are elected to some position, president of a union, national leader of a union, leader of a party, member of parliament, member of the legislature. Of course, they play a role. But the music is made by you people, by the people in the orchestra. You're the people who produce the great symphonies of life. We should never forget that. I have always believed, and I'm more convinced now than I ever was in my life, that it's people who make music. And you know, without those people all playing together on the same tune, on the same tempo, they're the people who produce the music of life. And that's what you people have done. What you've done through the years. You've worked together. You've created a great labor movement. Don MacDonald and I were just saying the other day, it's not many years ago that there were only a handful of unions in Canada, and only a handful of trade unionists. And I've watched over the years this trade union movement grow and grow, until today you number some 2,300,000 people organized and working together. That didn't come by accident. It came because you and thousands of workers whom you represent, people who'll never get a medal, people who'll never get an award like this, but they're the people who've built social democracy in Canada. They're the people who've built the trade union movement. That's what counts. That's what really counts. And my plea is that we keep on working, because there's so much to be done. We've come a long way. When I was a youngster in this city of city of Winnipeg, I started to serve my apprenticeship as a printer when I was 14 years of age. We were on strike one time for about 6 months. Some of us nearly starved, just to get union recognition, just to get recognized as having the right to bargain collectively. I remember when we worked 48-hour day, some of the shops that were union organized were working 54 and 56 hours a day. I remember being on strike here in the city of Winnipeg, and I was only 15, walking the streets with a piece of cardboard in my shoe to keep the snow out, because there was a hole in the sole. We've come a long way. Don't let anybody tell you, that we haven't made any progress. I've seen the people's movement at the trade union level, the cooperative level, the political level, grow by leaps and bounds until today we are a force in this land, and by God's grace we will dominate this land for the benefit of the ordinary people. My message to you is that there are great things to be done. We've come a long way. Made tremendous progress in the last number of years. And if we work together, we'll have differences of opinion, of course we will. We're not going to agree about every little detail. But if on the fundamental things, the right of people to organize and bargain collectively, the right to improve the lot of the working people, the right to see that people get a fair share of the wealth which they help to produce. If we are prepared to work and to struggle and to organize for these things, this country will go forward. The trade union movement will go forward. The social democratic movement will go forward. The farm movement will go forward. So that all the people who toiled to produce the wealth of this country and the wealth of the world will not only benefit themselves, but will use some of that wealth to benefit those less fortunate than themselves. I want to thank your President and the officers of the Canadian Labour Congress for this beautiful trophy. I shall prize it as long as I live. I know that Irma and myself will not only prize it ourselves, but our children will prize it. Because it will symbolize for us the working people of Canada. The people who with their toil and their sacrifice and their loyalty have made Canada what it is today. And if together we go forward into the future to be as faithful as our forefathers were to the trade union movement and to the social democratic movement, we will build in this land a place of security, a place where people may raise their families, a place in which men and women will know that they will have an opportunity to enjoy the wealth which they have produced. I'm therefore asking that again we set ourselves to the task of continuing to do what you have done. That is to go on building the kind of society in which the people who toil will get a fair return for what they have produced. I can't put it better than to say to you that problems change. That a few years ago we worried about how to distribute the wealth which our industrial system is capable of producing. Let me suggest that in the years that lie ahead, there are new problems. That we are now facing a world in which the pressure of population, of growing number of people on this globe, with a declining amount of resources to look after them, is creating new problems. And those problems, as we're already finding out, with our energy supplies diminishing, with unemployment beginning to appear in increasing measure, not only in our own country but in other countries, the time has already come when we, the working people of this land and of other lands, must use these declining resources to sustain the lives of our people and to reach out to develop new resources so that in the years ahead, those who follow after us will enjoy security and peace and human brotherhood. Thank you very much.
on behalf of the delegates to the 13th Constitutional Convention of the Canadian Labour Congress, Irma, this little token of our appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very, very much. Whatever is in the box, I shall treasure the rest of my life. Thank you very much.